Alright, let's talk about the fastest ways to kill your motorcycle engine. Engines are tough, but they're not invincible. I've seen riders destroy perfectly good bikes in record time, all because of bad habits, neglect, or plain ignorance. If you want your engine to last, you need to stop making these mistakes. Some of them are common sense, some of them will surprise you, but every single one of them will cost you big time if you don't pay attention. Let's get into it. Number 1. Skipping oil changes, or using the wrong oil. Oil is the lifeblood of your engine. It lubricates everything, keeps temperatures down, and prevents metal parts from grinding themselves into dust. But some riders ignore oil changes like they're optional. They're not. Run your engine with old sludgy oil and say goodbye to your piston rings, camshafts, and bearings. And let's talk about using the wrong oil. Ever heard someone say, "Oil is oil, just throw in whatever you have"? Yeah, that's how you turn your engine into an expensive paperweight. Every bike has a specific oil weight and type that it needs, whether it's conventional, synthetic, or semi-synthetic. Get it wrong, and you can end up with oil that's too thin to protect or too thick to circulate properly. The fix? Stick to your manufacturer's oil recommendations and change it on time. Cheap oil and skipped oil changes will cost you way more in engine repairs than a fresh quart of the good stuff. Number 2, revving a cold engine like you're at a drag strip. You wake up, fire up the bike, and immediately crank the throttle like you're about to launch at the track. Big mistake. When your engine is cold, the oil is thicker and hasn't circulated properly. That means metal parts are grinding against each other with barely any protection. You know this guy who always revs his bike like a lunatic every morning? His engine will last 2 years before the piston rings give out. He'll be trying to figure out why his bike was burning oil at 10,000 miles. The fix? Let your bike warm up properly. Give it a minute or two at idle before you start riding. And go easy on the throttle for the first few miles. Your engine will thank you. Number 3, running your bike low on oil. Some riders never check their oil level until it's too late. The dipstick? Never touched it. The sight glass? Didn't even know it existed. Here's the problem. Motorcycle engines burn a little oil over time. If you're not checking it, you could be running your engine half empty without even realizing it. I heard of a guy whose bike seized up on the highway. Turns out his oil was so low that the engine overheated and welded itself together. One moment he was cruising at 70 miles per hour, the next, a rolling paperweight. The fix? Check your oil regularly, at least every couple of weeks, or before long rides. Low oil means high heat and high wear. Your engine won't forgive you. Number 4, ignoring overheating and just sending it. Your temperature gauge is in the red, or maybe your bike feels hotter than usual. But instead of pulling over, you keep riding like nothing's wrong. Big mistake. Engines overheat for a reason. Low oil, coolant leaks, a bad thermostat, or a failing radiator fan. And when they get too hot, things start warping, seizing, and straight up melting. I've seen a guy melt a piston because he ignored his overheating light. He thought he could limp home. Instead, he ended up with a blown head gasket and a repair bill bigger than his rent. The fix? If your bike is overheating, stop. Let it cool down, check your coolant, and figure out what's wrong before you ride again. An overheated engine is a ticking time bomb. Number 5, using cheap gas or the wrong octane. Some riders treat their bikes like old lawnmowers. Just throw in whatever gas is cheapest and hope for the best. Bad idea. Your engine needs the right octane fuel to run properly. If your bike requires premium gas and you're running regular, you're risking detonation, knocking, loss of power, and internal damage. And let's talk about bad gas. Old, stale fuel or cheap gas from a no-name station can be loaded with ethanol and impurities that gum up injectors, clog carbs, and eat away at rubber seals. I once drained gas that looked like pond water out of a bike that wouldn't start. Turns out the owner had been filling up at the cheapest pump he could find. His fuel system was a disaster. The fix? Use the octane your bike is designed for, and if your bike sits for a while, use a fuel stabilizer to keep gas from turning into varnish. Cheap gas will cost you way more in repairs than a couple of extra cents at the pump. Number 6. Lugging the engine in high gear. Some riders think lower RPMs always mean better fuel economy, so they shift into 5th or 6th gear at 30 miles per hour and let the engine struggle at low RPMs. That's called lugging the engine, and it's one of the worst things you can do. Engines are designed to run at a certain RPM range. If you're constantly forcing your bike to chug along at too low an RPM, you're putting extra stress on the crankshaft, bearings, and transmission. I had a buddy who rode his bike like he was driving a Prius. He thought staying in high gear all the time would save the engine. What it actually did was wear out his bottom end early. By the time he hit 25,000 miles, his bearings were toast. The fix? Ride in the right gear for your speed. Your bike isn't designed to run at idle while moving. Keep it in the power band, and you'll avoid excessive wear. Number 7. Redlining the engine all the time. Revving your bike to the red line once in a while won't kill it, but constantly bouncing off the limiter is like asking your engine to self-destruct. Engines are designed to handle high RPMs, but the parts inside, the pistons, the valves, the bearings, all wear down faster when you keep them screaming at max revs. Back in the early days of MotoGP, some teams tried pushing engines beyond their red line just to squeeze out a little extra power. It worked for about one race before the engines grenaded spectacularly. High revs generate excess heat, extra stress, and oil starvation at extreme limits. If you love your engine, don't treat it like a race bike every time you ride. Number 8. Riding with a clogged or dirty air filter. Your engine needs clean air to run efficiently. A clogged air filter chokes airflow, making your bike run rich, lose power, and burn more fuel. On carbureted bikes, this can mean excess fuel washing away lubrication inside the cylinders, which accelerates wear on piston rings. Ever seen an old dirt bike blowing black smoke? That's usually a filthy air filter suffocating the engine. Check your air filter regularly, especially if you ride in dusty or wet conditions. Some filters can be clogged, others need replacing. Either way, don't let your engine breathe through a clogged up mess. Number 9. Using the wrong coolant, or no coolant at all. Liquid-cooled bikes need the right coolant mixture to keep engine temps stable. Some riders think they can just use water or mix coolants without a second thought. Bad idea. Plain water doesn't have anti-corrosion properties and will rust your radiator, water pump, and cooling passages. Mixing different types of coolant, well, that can turn into a sludge that blocks cooling channels. Ever heard of the 1995 Daytona 200 disaster? A team used the wrong coolant mix and their race bike overheated mid-race, blowing the head gasket and spilling coolant all over the track. Stick to the manufacturer-recommended coolant, and if you're changing it, flush the old stuff out first. Number 10. Letting your bike sit too long without running it. Engines are meant to run, not sit. If you park your bike for months without starting it, you're asking for stale fuel, dried out seals, and internal corrosion. In cold weather, moisture builds up inside the engine, leading to rust on cylinder walls, cam lobes, and bearings. In hot weather, fuel evaporates and leaves behind gummy deposits that clog injectors and carb jets. Jay Leno once said that the best way to preserve an engine is to use it. He's right. Old fuel and sitting oil can cause way more damage than mileage ever will. If you're storing your bike, run it at least once a month to keep everything lubricated. If it's sitting longer, prep it properly. Drain or stabilize the fuel, fog the cylinders, and keep the battery on a tender. Number 11. Riding in the wrong gear for too long. You already know lugging the engine in high gear is bad, but what about constantly running in too low a gear? Some riders keep their RPMs way too high all the time, thinking it makes the bike more responsive. What they're actually doing is putting extra stress on the valve train, increasing friction and overheating the engine. This is especially bad for air-cooled engines that rely on proper airflow to stay cool. Revving them too high at low speeds means you're cooking the internals. Want proof? Just look at old Harley engines that spent too much time idling or revved hard in traffic. They overheat, warp parts, and start leaking oil everywhere. Know your bike's sweet spot for shifting and keep it there. Riding in the wrong gear for too long wears everything out faster. Number 12, ignoring strange noises until it's too late. Your engine talks to you, if you're paying attention. Ignoring strange knocking, ticking, or whining noises is like ignoring chest pain and hoping it goes away. A light ticking could be a valve clearance issue. A deep knocking, that might be rod bearings saying goodbye. A whining sound, your cam chain tensioner could be shot. Some riders think it's just an old bike, they all make noise. But that mindset is how you end up with a broken timing chain, a spun bearing, or a dropped valve. A guy came to me with a Ducati making a clattering sound that he ignored for weeks. One day, boom! Desmo valve failure. That engine was done. If your engine starts sounding different, investigate it. Small problems turn into big expensive repairs if you wait too long. Motorcycle engines aren't fragile, but if you treat yours like it's disposable, it won't last long. Avoid these common engine-killing mistakes, and your bike will keep running strong for years instead of months. Now, I want to hear from you. What's the worst engine mistake you've seen someone make? Ever had an engine blow up on you? Drop a comment below and share your story. And if this helped you out, hit that like button and subscribe. More riding wisdom coming your way soon. Ride smart, ride safe, and take care of your engine.